So right now you're on step three, and step three is going to be about the costs and benefits of owning property. Um, the information I'm going to give you here is just some things to think about when it comes to buying property, because when we think of property, right? Here's our risk ladder again. And so far we talked about having cash at your home. That's the lowest risk. Then we talked about bank accounts. That's still very low risk. It's right around here. Bonds, that's going to be covered in the readings. We won't talk about that now. Owning property would be considered what's minimum risk, medium risk, because again, the average return for property tends to be about 10%. So this is all I want to say about property, because people often make this mistake with it, is that there are cases where people win when they buy property, and then there are times when people lose. And remember, all of it is about building what we call equity. Now, this is a term that we actually covered at the beginning of our unit, but remember what equity is. It's the difference between your assets and your liabilities. So in other words, when you look at this example, right? Again, equity equals your assets minus your liabilities. Assets is money in the pocket. Liabilities are money leaving your pocket. So for example, your assets might be a home. They could be stocks. They could be a car that you own. In other words, assets add value to you. Liabilities, again, it's money flying out of your pocket, so maybe this could be credit card debt. Maybe it could be a car loan. Because again, these are things that you're paying. So if let's say in assets you had, we'll go with $20,000, but you have $10,000 in credit card debt and student loan debt, then your equity, 20,000 minus 10,000, your equity would be 10,000, which is good because you're still in the positive, right? But if let's say you had again 20,000 in assets, but then you owe 40,000 in student loans, well then your equity would be minus 20,000. In other words, you would be in the red. That would not be good. Okay? So, equity is about building positive equity over time. That's really it's really, another way to think about equity is it's really your wealth, right? So you always want your wealth to be positive. You never want your wealth to be negative. Okay, so now where does home ownership come into this? Well, this is where people go wrong with owning homes. Because they are often not honest about their situation. So a mortgage is, when people buy homes, very rarely do people have enough money to pay for the entire home themselves, right? So what people often do is they'll put what's called a down payment. So maybe, a couple gets married and they are able to put $30,000 down as a down payment. It means if this home is for $250,000, they got to get a loan from a bank to cover the rest of the money, right? So they would have to get a loan for $220,000. That's what a mortgage is. A mortgage is basically the loan you take out from the bank to purchase the rest of your home. So now what happens is you get your home, but now you're paying the bank back. So remember, that loan that you got, you have to pay interest on that. So this is what I mean where people go wrong with homes. So let's say we spent $250,000 on that home, right? And over the course of living there 20 years, we had to put $50,000 of repairs into the home. Like the siding needs fixing, the roof needs fixing, the yard care, the water tank went, so we got to repair the water tank. Meaning, so when you buy a home, it's not just about the initial price that you paid, it's also about the money that you put into it while you own the home. So let's say over that 20-year period, between the actual mortgage and paying about $50,000 in repairs over time, the total cost for that home ends up being about $300,000. Keep in mind, too, you would have also had to pay property taxes on it every year, right, which is a certain percentage of the value of your home. And then you would also have to pay the interest to the bank. So even though you took a loan for $220,000, keep in mind you're going to end up paying the bank way more than that. So this number would even be higher. Now, this is what I mean by where people are kind of not honest with themselves. Let's say your parents decide they want to sell their home. Now remember, your parents have spent about $300,000 for the home total. Let's say this year the market was down and the property values decreased. And let's say your parents had an evaluator come and they valued your home at $200,000. Now I know you're saying, well, wait a minute, Mr. Mullins, didn't you buy it 20 years ago for $250,000? You did, but remember, maybe property values in your area went down. So now they can only really sell the home for $200,000 because people aren't willing to pay more in that neighborhood. So that's the value of the home. Now let's say your parents get lucky and are able to sell the home for $200,000. Here's the thing, right? Remember what your parents originally paid. They paid $300,000. So if they sell the home for $200,000, don't forget they would have to pay taxes on this money as well. They technically, right, you got to do $200,000 minus the $300,000 that they put into it. So your parents actually lost money on that home, right? Oftentimes when people sell their homes, they'll be like, oh, I made $200,000. Well, no, you didn't, because you actually, if you're being more honest, you got to subtract the cost that you paid for it plus repairs. So your parents, they lost money on owning this home. Now, let's say though they get really lucky, and let's say they bought this home in East New York for $250,000, and then just 20 years, East New York starts really taking off, and all of a sudden that home is now worth $1 million. Now, if your parents sell for $1 million and somebody buys it, you still got to subtract the $300,000, but still, in this case, your parents would have made $700,000 in profit. So, property can be very good, but it's only good if you're able to sell it for a higher rate than what you bought it for and paid for over time. The other thing I want you to think of when it comes to property is what's called income properties. So an example of an income property would be your parents buy a building for $250,000. And then let's say the building has 18 apartments. Sometimes they'll just call them units. And let's say the average rent that your parents make it is $1,800 a month. So all those checks coming in for those $18 apartments, your parents would then be using those checks to pay the mortgage. So income properties can be a way where, yes, you will lose money up front because you put the money up front, but then the point is you rent the property out so that that person is the one paying your mortgage, basically. In other words, your parents aren't paying money out of their pocket, it's all the renters who are paying for your mortgage, basically. So that's one area where you can make money off of property. And then a final thing is, if we go back to this example, going back to the example of where your parents lost $100,000, yes, your parents might have lost $100,000, but if let's say they give the home to you, right? You're their children. So, if your parents put in their will, I pass ownership of the home over to my child, Jerome. Well, Jerome never paid $250,000. Jerome never paid $50,000. So, in other words, that home, right? He put no money into it. So, yeah, if he was able to sell the home for $200,000, then yeah, that's a win. That's a win for the son because, again, he didn't put money into the home. He got to sell it because his parents left it to him. So his parents took a hit, but he was able to make a profit off of it later down the road. And the final thing I want to say about this is, why does equity matter? Well, equity can be passed down generationally, right? So whatever wealth your parents are building right now, they will eventually pass that down to you, right? If they have children or if they have family members. And what you could do is you build up equity for your family, you build up wealth over time. We've talked a lot about this year how one of the reasons why the black community across the United States has had trouble building equity is because how many times have we seen equity stripped from them, right? We saw how in 1919 and the 1920s, so many black communities were burned to the ground, so all that property was lost, right? During the Great Depression, black people were definitely more likely to lose their jobs than white people, so again, equity wiped out. Same thing facing the 2008 financial crisis. Many black people lost their retirement savings. White people did too. But notice how it keeps happening to black people. It makes it very hard to build equity for wealth for their families. So one of the things you have to see in personal finance is that it is a way for you to fight the system. If you, as members of the black community, and this goes for other groups as well, if you could start building equity for yourself and then pass that equity on to your children or family members and then they pass it on, right? That is a way to build wealth for your family and for your community, right? And here's the thing, maybe some of you won't have children, and that's okay. But it's a question of what do you do with that money? Because here's the thing, if you die and you have no will, what happens is the state takes all your assets. And when the state does that, it becomes very hard for your family to get access to it. They'll have to pay tons of money in lawyers to try to do it, and it ends up being more money to get it than it was to get the actual money. So you always want to have a will that lays out who's going to get the assets once you die. But if you look at Nipsey Hussle, who you could see here on the screen, first of all, Nipsey Hussle in his music, he sung a lot about personal finance. One of the lessons that I wish I got to do with you, that I did with the students last year, is actually use his music to teach investing, because he has so many lyrics about investing. So, guys, you have been getting finance lessons all along. Many rappers, in particular, have a lot of finance in their lyrics. So like when you're listening to rap and they're bringing up finance, listen to them because they are teaching you lessons. But if you look at this picture, and I hope you guys can see it okay, here is all the money Nipsey Hussle put back into the community that he lived in, right? For example, he invested in blockchains. That's music apps. He launched Our Opportunity, which is an organization that helps revamp neighborhoods and cities. He co-founded a school. He reopened a roller rink, right? And what they found with all of Nipsey's investments in the community, the value of his investments, because even though he was killed, right, his investments are still making money. His community is now $210 million wealthier than it was before he did that. So, like I said, if you want to fight the system, building up equity is definitely a way to do it. It's a way to do it for yourself, it's a way to do it for your family, and it's especially a way to do it for your community. So that's all I want to say on property. Like I said, property is medium risk. Some people win, some people lose. That's why you need to know what you want to do. Do you want to buy this home as an income property, or do you want to buy this home to live in? Are you buying in a neighborhood where the property values will eventually go up, or are you buying in a neighborhood where the property values might decrease? One thing about property values is they are always usually higher in neighborhoods that have schools that people want to put their children in. So like if you live out in the suburbs and it's a very well-known school district, the property values will probably be very high in that area, which means to buy you will have to pay a lot of money. And when you sell, you might, maybe you'll make a profit, maybe you won't. If you're talking about certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn, obviously if you buy in Cobble Hill, the property values are extremely high, but you can buy in East New York and still get, a good deal compared to the rest of Brooklyn. It's just a question of will East New York rise in property value like the other parts of Brooklyn or not. So that's all I'm going to say about property. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And we're going to move on to our final part of this lesson, which is how to invest.